The cruelest thing about being rejected wasn't losing the bond. It was discovering how quickly people learn to live without you. Emily Carter kept walking long after the voices faded behind her. The celebration lights of Red Pine Pack flickered through the trees in the distance, growing smaller with every step she took. An hour ago, hundreds of wolves had stood beneath the blood moon and watched her future fall apart. No one had stopped it. No one had spoken for her. And when the ceremony ended, no one had followed. The cold October air brushed against her pale skin as she wrapped her thin gray sweater tighter around herself. Fallen leaves crunched beneath her boots. Above her, the moon hung low and red, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Emily didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay. Every corner of the pack grounds carried a memory now. Every path reminded her of promises that had vanished in a single evening. Her chest still ached whenever she thought about it. Not because she missed the male who had rejected her. Deep down, she realized she had been mourning something else entirely. The life she thought she was supposed to have. The life everyone else seemed to receive so easily. A warm home. A place to belong. Someone who looked at her and saw value. Instead, she had spent 22 years learning how to disappear. She had become skilled at standing quietly at the edge of rooms. Skilled at lowering her eyes. Skilled at pretending harsh words didn't hurt. Tonight, she was simply too tired to keep pretending. The forest grew quieter as she ventured farther from pack territory. Towering pines stretched toward the night sky. Their branches swayed gently in the breeze, whispering secrets she couldn't understand. Somewhere nearby, a creek flowed over smooth stones, its steady sound strangely comforting. Emily followed it until she found a clearing sheltered by an enormous oak tree. The ancient trunk looked wide enough to hide a truck behind it. Golden leaves drifted down around her like soft rain. For the first time all night, she stopped walking. Her legs trembled from exhaustion. She sank onto the ground and leaned against the rough bark. The silence settled around her. No laughter. No judgment. No pity. Just the forest. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away before they could fall. She had cried enough already. Tilting her head back, she stared through the branches at the stars. If I disappeared, she whispered into the darkness, would anyone even notice? The forest offered no answer. Only the distant rustle of leaves. Eventually, exhaustion pulled at her heavier than grief. Her eyelids grew heavy. The cold air wrapped around her like a blanket. Within minutes, her breathing slowed and sleep claimed her beneath the ancient oak. Emily never noticed the faint movement among the shadows beyond the clearing. She never saw the tall figure standing motionless between the trees. She never noticed the pair of silver eyes fixed quietly upon her sleeping form. And while the entire world seemed to forget the rejected Omega that night, someone remained. Watching. Waiting. Unwilling to leave. The forest seemed to hold its breath around her. Emily slept beneath the ancient oak, curled against the roots as moonlight filtered through the branches above. For the first time in months, her face looked peaceful. No forced smile. No careful mask. No effort to convince the world she was stronger than she felt. Just exhaustion. A few yards away, hidden among the shadows of the pines, Adrian Blackwood remained perfectly still. The Alpha King had spent the last 7 hours tracking unusual reports along the northern border. Strange scents. Unfamiliar movement. Rumors that something was stirring beyond the territories. None of it should have led him here. None of it should have placed a rejected Omega in the center of his path. Yet there she was. He studied the sleeping woman from a distance. Her sweater was too thin for the dropping temperature. Her boots were worn from years of use. Even in sleep, faint lines of sadness lingered around her eyes. She looked as though she had been carrying burdens far heavier than herself for a very long time. Adrian should have left. Every instinct told him to continue his mission. He was a king. Entire territories depended on his judgment. Yet each time he turned to leave, something stopped him. It was not attraction. It was not curiosity. At least, that was what he told himself. But there was something about the sight of her sleeping alone in the wilderness that refused to release his attention. A soft wind moved through the clearing. Emily shifted slightly and pulled her arms closer around herself. Without waking, she whispered something too quiet for most wolves to hear. Adrian heard every word. I tried. The words were barely more than a breath. I really tried. Something tightened unexpectedly inside his chest. The emotion irritated him immediately. Kings did not spend their nights worrying about strangers. Especially strangers who belonged to another pack. Yet the sadness in her sleeping voice lingered in the air long after the words disappeared. Hours passed. The moon climbed higher. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called into the darkness. The creek continued its steady song over smooth stones. Emily never stirred. She slept as though every ounce of strength had finally abandoned her. Adrian glanced toward the tree line. His senses remained alert despite the stillness. Nothing dangerous approached. No unusual scents. No disturbances. Just endless forest stretching for miles beneath the silver glow of the night sky. For reasons he could not fully explain, he remained where he was. Watching. Guarding. Waiting for dawn. At some point during the night, clouds drifted across the moon. The temperature dropped another few degrees. Emily shivered visibly. Her body instinctively curling tighter against the cold ground. Adrian frowned. Before he could reconsider, he stepped silently from the shadows and approached the sleeping Omega. Up close, she looked even younger than he had first thought. Fragile, but not weak. There was a difference. He removed the heavy black cloak from his shoulders. Carefully, he draped it across her without making enough contact to wake her. Emily sighed softly and settled deeper into the warmth. Adrian stepped back immediately. The moment felt strangely personal, which annoyed him even more. Returning to the shadows, he folded his arms and fixed his attention on the approaching horizon. The first faint hints of dawn were beginning to touch the eastern sky. But before sunrise arrived, a sudden sound reached his ears. Footsteps. Human footsteps. More than one. And they were heading directly toward the clearing. Emily woke to the sound of distant voices. For a brief moment, she did not remember where she was. She blinked slowly, staring up at the canopy of golden leaves overhead while pale morning light filtered through the branches. Then reality returned. The ceremony. The rejection. The long walk into the forest. A familiar ache settled quietly inside her chest. She pushed herself upright and immediately froze. Something warm slid from her shoulders. Emily looked down in confusion. Draped across her lap was a heavy black cloak made from fabric far finer than anything she had ever owned. Her fingers brushed the material. Soft. Expensive. Impossibly clean for something left in the middle of the forest. Her heartbeat quickened. She glanced around the clearing. Empty. The voices she had heard moments earlier drifted faintly through the trees. Whoever had left the cloak was gone. Or so it seemed. Unknown to her, Adrian stood high on a rocky ridge overlooking the clearing from nearly 100 yards away. Hidden by pine trees and morning shadows, he watched as Emily examined the cloak. A small part of him expected her to leave it behind. Instead, she carefully folded it and held it against her chest. The sight produced an unfamiliar feeling of satisfaction that immediately irritated him. Below, Emily rose to her feet. The forest looked different in daylight. Less frightening. More lonely. She adjusted the borrowed cloak around her shoulders and followed the sound of running water toward the creek she had heard during the night. The icy stream reflected the morning sky like glass. Kneeling beside it, she splashed cool water onto her face. For the first time since yesterday, she truly looked at her reflection. Tired green eyes stared back at her. Loose strands of brown hair framed pale cheeks. She looked exactly like someone who had lost everything. Emily forced herself to look away. Self-pity would not change anything. A sudden rustling nearby caught her attention. She turned and spotted a small rabbit tangled in a patch of thorny vines. The frightened animal struggled helplessly, making the branches tighten around its tiny leg. Emily hesitated only a second before setting down the cloak and approaching carefully. "Easy there," she whispered. "I am not going to hurt you." The rabbit froze, trembling. Slowly and patiently, she worked the vines loose until the animal was free. For a moment it remained perfectly still. Then it hopped several feet away before turning back toward her. Emily smiled despite herself. It was the first genuine smile she had worn in days. Hidden among the trees, Adrian witnessed everything. He had seen countless wolves display strength. He had seen warriors earn glory and leaders command respect. Yet there was something strangely rare about simple kindness offered when nobody was watching. Emily had no audience. No reward. No reason to help except that another living creature needed it. The rabbit disappeared into the undergrowth. Emily stood and brushed dirt from her hands. As she reached for the cloak again, another sound drifted through the forest. This time the voices were much closer. Familiar voices. Her smile vanished instantly. Somewhere beyond the trees, members of her former pack were searching the woods. And judging by the tone of their conversation, they were searching for her. "Sometimes people come looking for you because they care," Emily's grandmother had once told her. "And sometimes they come looking because they cannot stand the thought of you finding peace without them." The voices drifted through the trees, growing clearer with every passing second. Emily immediately recognized two of them. Nathan. Bryce. Wolves from her former pack. Neither had spoken a kind word to her in years. Her stomach tightened. Instinctively, she stepped deeper into the shelter of the pines and pulled the black cloak closer around her shoulders. The forest suddenly felt smaller. Colder. Less welcoming. "She cannot have gotten far," one voice said. "The alpha's son made quite a scene rejecting her. Everyone is talking about it." Laughter followed. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Even here, miles from the ceremony, the humiliation refused to let go. "Maybe she finally left the territory," another voice replied. "Would save everyone a lot of trouble." Emily lowered her gaze. The words should not have hurt anymore. She had heard variations of them her entire life. Yet somehow they still found fresh places to wound. High above the clearing, Adrian remained hidden on the ridge. His silver eyes followed every movement below. He listened carefully as the pack wolves moved through the forest. Their scent carried no real danger. Mostly arrogance. Mostly carelessness. Yet something about their conversation sharpened his attention. They spoke about Emily as though she were a problem to manage rather than a person. The Alpha King had heard similar tones before. They rarely revealed anything admirable. Below, Emily quietly moved away from the approaching voices. She followed a narrow path winding between ancient pines. The morning sunlight filtered through the branches in golden beams. Birds sang overhead. The beauty of the forest felt strangely disconnected from the heaviness inside her chest. She walked for nearly 20 minutes before the voices finally faded behind her. Only then did she allow herself to breathe normally again. The path eventually opened into a small meadow surrounded by wildflowers and tall grass. Emily stopped at the edge of it. The sight caught her completely by surprise. Tiny white blossoms covered the ground like scattered stars. For the first time since yesterday, something inside her relaxed. She stepped into the meadow and knelt beside the flowers. Their sweet scent drifted through the morning air. "You are lucky," she whispered softly. "Nobody expects anything from you." Adrian watched from a distance. The words reached him clearly despite the space between them. He found himself wondering how many disappointments had shaped someone so young into believing she carried no value. The thought lingered longer than he liked. Suddenly, a movement near the opposite side of the meadow caught Emily's attention. A small wolf pup emerged from the grass. Its silver-gray fur shimmered in the sunlight. One of its front paws lifted awkwardly as it walked. The little creature looked uncertain but determined. Emily's expression softened immediately. "Hey there," she whispered. The pup paused. Its bright eyes studied her carefully. Then, to Emily's surprise, it began limping toward her. Slowly. Trustingly. She remained perfectly still until the pup reached her side. Gently, she examined its paw. A thorn was lodged between the pads. "That explains it," she murmured. With careful fingers, she removed the thorn and brushed the fur smooth again. The pup immediately wagged its tail and pressed its head against her hand. Emily laughed quietly. A genuine laugh. Warm. Unforced. The sound echoed softly across the meadow. Hidden among the trees, Adrian froze. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. And for reasons he could not explain, he found himself unwilling to look away. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the far edge of the forest. A stranger had arrived. And unlike Adrian, this newcomer was not there by accident. The stranger remained hidden beyond the tree line, watching the meadow with careful patience. Unlike Adrian, he carried the scent of calculation rather than curiosity. His sharp eyes moved between Emily and the silver-gray pup resting happily beside her. Something about the scene seemed to unsettle him. Emily, unaware of the attention surrounding her, continued scratching gently behind the pup's ears. "You are a friendly little thing," she said with a soft smile. The pup responded by nudging her hand again. It was such a simple gesture, yet it warmed something inside her that had felt cold for years. For a few precious minutes, she forgot about rejection. She forgot about whispers and judgment and all the expectations she had never managed to meet. Here, surrounded by wildflowers and morning sunlight, she was simply Emily. Nothing more. Nothing less. The pup eventually wandered a few feet away, chasing drifting leaves carried by the breeze. Emily laughed quietly as it pounced clumsily on a particularly stubborn leaf. The sound carried across the meadow. Adrian heard it again. He found himself studying the contrast between the woman before him and the broken figure he had watched the previous night. The sadness was still there. He could see it in the way her smile faded whenever she thought nobody was looking. But beneath it existed something stronger. Kindness. Resilience. A refusal to become cruel despite how often the world had been cruel to her. Those qualities were far rarer than strength. The Alpha King knew that better than most. Emily rose and began walking slowly through the meadow. The pup followed close behind as though it had already decided she belonged to it. She glanced down and smiled. "You should probably go home before somebody starts worrying about you." The pup tilted its head. Then it sat directly in her path. Emily sighed dramatically. "That is not what I said." Hidden in the forest, Adrian almost smiled. Almost. Before the moment could linger, a sudden movement caught his attention. The stranger at the edge of the woods had shifted position. Adrian's expression hardened instantly. The man was watching Emily far too closely. More importantly, he was concealing himself with enough skill to suggest experience. That alone was concerning. The stranger remained motionless for several seconds before quietly retreating deeper into the trees. Adrian tracked his departure carefully. Every instinct told him the encounter was not random. Yet abandoning Emily to investigate would leave her alone again. An irrational sense of responsibility settled over him. He disliked it immediately. Meanwhile, Emily reached into her pocket and discovered the last granola bar she had packed before the ceremony. It had been crushed during her walk through the forest, but it was still edible. She broke it in half. One piece for herself. One piece for the pup. The little wolf accepted the offering happily. "Looks like we are both surviving on leftovers today," she joked. As she spoke, a distant church bell echoed faintly from somewhere beyond the forest. The sound reminded her how far she had wandered from home. Home. The word no longer felt right. Her smile faded. The pup immediately pressed against her leg as though sensing the shift in her mood. Emily blinked in surprise. "You are not supposed to understand emotions that well," she whispered. Yet somehow the small creature seemed determined to comfort her anyway. High above the meadow, Adrian watched the interaction unfold. And for the first time since meeting her, he began to understand why walking away had become so unexpectedly difficult. The afternoon sun drifted slowly across the sky, painting the meadow in shades of gold and amber. Emily sat beneath a large maple tree with the silver-gray pup curled beside her. For the first time in what felt like years, nobody was asking her to prove her worth. Nobody was reminding her of her failures. The forest demanded nothing from her. It simply allowed her to exist. She looked toward the distant mountains rising beyond the trees. Somewhere beyond them were towns she had never seen and roads she had never traveled. The thought was both frightening and strangely comforting. Maybe there was a place in the world where nobody knew her name. Maybe there was a place where being rejected did not define an entire future. Beside her, the pup lifted its head suddenly. Its ears twitched. Emily noticed the change immediately. "What is it?" she asked softly. The pup stared toward the woods. Not frightened. Alert. As though it sensed someone nearby. Emily followed its gaze but saw nothing except shadows between the trees. Still, an odd feeling settled over her. The same feeling she had experienced several times since waking. The feeling that she was not alone. Hidden high among the pines, Adrian observed the scene in silence. Hours had passed since dawn, yet he remained. Rationally, he knew it made little sense. His advisors were probably searching for him by now. Reports awaited his attention. Decisions affecting thousands of lives sat unfinished. Yet each time he considered leaving, he found another reason to stay. The stranger from earlier remained the greatest concern. Adrian had quietly tracked the man's movements throughout the morning. Whoever he was, he had not left the forest. He was watching. Waiting. And that alone kept the Alpha King close. Below, Emily rose and stretched her tired muscles. The black cloak still rested around her shoulders. She glanced down at it thoughtfully. Whoever owned it had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return. That realization felt surprisingly emotional. Kindness had become so rare that she almost did not know what to do with it anymore. "I wish I could thank you," she murmured quietly. Adrian heard every word. Something unexpectedly warm stirred inside him before he immediately pushed the feeling aside. Emily started walking again, following a narrow trail that wound deeper into the forest. The pup trotted beside her without hesitation. The farther they traveled, the quieter the world became. Even the birds seemed to lower their voices beneath the towering pines. Eventually, they reached a small clearing where an old stone fountain stood half-covered in moss. Emily stopped in surprise. It looked ancient. Forgotten by time. Water still flowed gently from its center, sparkling beneath the afternoon light. "Wow," she whispered. She stepped closer and brushed her fingers along the weathered stone. The place felt peaceful. Sacred somehow. Then she noticed something carved into the fountain's base. A crest. A crown surrounded by wolves. Her brow furrowed. The symbol seemed familiar, though she could not remember where she had seen it before. High above the clearing, Adrian's expression changed instantly. He recognized the crest immediately. It belonged to the royal bloodline. And very few people knew this hidden fountain even existed. Before he could decide whether to intervene, a voice suddenly echoed from the trees. "Interesting," the stranger said as he stepped into the clearing at last. "I have been looking for someone all day. I never expected to find you instead." Emily turned so quickly that the black cloak slipped from one shoulder. The stranger stood several yards away at the edge of the clearing. He appeared to be in his 40s, dressed in dark traveling clothes that blended naturally with the forest. His smile was polite, but something about it felt carefully practiced rather than genuine. The silver-gray pup immediately moved closer to Emily's side. The change was subtle, yet she noticed it. "Who are you?" she asked. The man lowered his head slightly. "Just a traveler." Emily almost laughed. Nobody wandered this deep into the forest by accident. Travelers usually introduce themselves. The man's smile widened. "Fair enough. My name is Victor." He glanced toward the ancient fountain. "And you are Emily Carter." Her stomach tightened instantly. She had never seen him before. "How do you know my name?" Victor spread his hands calmly. "News travels fast. Especially after a public rejection ceremony." The words landed harder than she wanted to admit. Even here, miles from the pack, she could not escape being known for her worst moment. High above the clearing, Adrian's gaze darkened. He did not like the way Victor spoke. The man revealed information too deliberately, as though testing Emily's reactions. More importantly, he knew exactly who she was. That meant this encounter had never been accidental. Below, Emily folded her arms. "If you already know who I am, then why are you here?" For the first time, Victor hesitated. His eyes briefly shifted toward the royal crest carved into the fountain. "I am searching for something," he said. "Something important." Emily followed his gaze to the symbol in the stone. "Does it have something to do with this place?" Victor studied her carefully. "Perhaps." The answer raised more questions than it solved. Before Emily could press further, the pup suddenly stood. Its ears flattened. A low growl vibrated in its chest. Not threatening. Warning. Both Emily and Victor looked toward the forest. The atmosphere had changed. The birds had fallen silent. Even the breeze seemed to have disappeared. A strange tension settled across the clearing. Emily felt it immediately. "What is wrong?" she whispered. The pup moved directly in front of her feet. Victor's expression tightened. "That is unexpected." "What is?" Emily asked. He did not answer. Adrian already knew. His heightened senses had detected several unfamiliar scents approaching from the eastern ridge. Not pack wolves. Not travelers. Strangers. The same presence he had been tracking before finding Emily. He remained hidden, watching carefully as figures appeared between the distant trees. There were 4 of them. Cloaked. Silent. Moving with purpose. Emily could barely make out their shapes through the forest. Fear stirred quietly inside her. Not because they looked dangerous. Because they seemed to know exactly where they were going. Toward the fountain. Toward the crest. Toward her. Victor took a slow step backward. "This is unfortunate." Emily's eyes widened. "Do you know them?" "No," he replied. "But I know what they are looking for." "What are they looking for?" Victor's gaze settled on her face. "That," he said quietly, "is the question that should worry all of us." For a moment, nobody moved. The 4 cloaked figures continued advancing through the trees with calm, deliberate steps. They did not appear hurried. They did not appear lost. They walked with the confidence of people who already knew exactly where they were going. Emily felt the unease growing inside her. The silver-gray pup pressed against her leg, refusing to leave her side. Even Victor seemed unsettled now. The confident traveler she had met minutes earlier was gone. In his place stood a man calculating every possible exit from the clearing. High above them, Adrian watched the situation unfold. His attention remained fixed on the approaching strangers. Their scent matched the traces he had been following along the northern border. That alone confirmed his suspicions. Whatever mission had first brought him into the forest was now connected to the people approaching the fountain. And somehow, Emily had become part of it. The nearest cloaked figure stepped into the sunlight. Emily noticed that his clothing carried no pack insignia. No colors. No identifying marks at all. It was as if the group wanted to belong nowhere and everywhere at the same time. The stranger's eyes settled briefly on Victor. You arrived before us. Victor offered a strained smile. Apparently not early enough. The newcomer ignored the response. Instead, his gaze shifted toward Emily. A strange silence followed. Not hostile. Not friendly. Merely focused. Emily resisted the urge to step backward. Can somebody tell me what is happening? She asked. No one answered immediately. The first cloaked figure looked toward the ancient fountain. Then toward the royal crest carved into the stone. Finally, he returned his attention to Emily. You touched the fountain. It was not a question. Yes, Emily replied cautiously. Why? Another silence. The four strangers exchanged brief glances. Something invisible seemed to pass between them. Understanding. Concern. Surprise. Emily's confusion deepened. What does that mean? The man took a slow breath. Nothing should have happened. Emily frowned. Nothing did happen. Before anyone could reply, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing. Leaves spiraled through the air. Water splashed softly within the fountain. Then something unexpected occurred. The royal crest engraved into the stone began to shimmer faintly beneath the sunlight. Emily blinked. Certain she had imagined it. Yet the glow remained. Soft. Silver. Beautiful. The strangers reacted instantly. Victor's face lost all color. Even the mysterious group appeared shocked. Hidden above the clearing, Adrian straightened. His pulse quickened for the first time all day. He knew that crest. He knew its history. And he knew it should not respond to anyone except members of the royal bloodline. Emily stared at the glowing symbol in disbelief. What is that? She whispered. The nearest stranger finally answered. That, he said quietly, is impossible. The light lingered for several seconds before gradually fading away. Silence returned to the clearing. Nobody seemed willing to speak first. Emily looked from one face to another. Can somebody please explain why everyone keeps staring at me? This time the answer came from somewhere behind her. Because, a calm male voice said, they have just witnessed something they never expected to see. Emily turned. Her breath caught instantly. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a tall man with dark hair, silver eyes, and a presence powerful enough to command attention without speaking another word. For the first time since entering the forest, Adrian Blackwood stepped out of the shadows. Silence settled across the clearing. Even the strangers seemed uncertain how to react. Emily stood frozen beside the ancient fountain, staring at the man who had stepped from the shadows. She knew that face. Every wolf in the Northern Territories knew that face. Portraits hung in pack halls. Stories were told around fires. His name carried enough weight to silence entire rooms. Adrian Blackwood. The Alpha King. Her heart stumbled. For a second she wondered if exhaustion had finally caused her mind to betray her. Yet the silver eyes were real. The commanding presence was real. The black cloak draped around her shoulders suddenly made terrifying sense. A realization struck her so quickly she nearly forgot to breathe. He had been there. Somehow, impossibly, he had been there all along. Victor lowered his head immediately. The four cloaked strangers followed. Respect filled the clearing like an invisible tide. Emily remained standing exactly where she was. Not because she intended disrespect. Because she could not seem to remember how to move. Adrian's gaze found hers. Unlike everyone else, he showed no surprise. It was as though he had expected this moment from the beginning. He approached the fountain slowly. The silver-gray pup immediately ran toward him and sat proudly at his feet. Emily blinked. You know him? She whispered. The pup wagged its tail. Adrian glanced down briefly. Apparently. The response was so unexpectedly dry that Emily almost laughed despite herself. Almost. The Alpha King stopped beside the fountain and studied the faded crest. "You touched the stone," he said. It was not an accusation. Merely a fact. Emily nodded. "I did not know I was not supposed to." "Most people can touch it," Adrian replied. "Nothing happens." Emily looked toward the place where the silver light had appeared earlier. "Then why did it react?" None of the strangers answered. Victor avoided her eyes completely. Adrian remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he looked directly at her. "That is what everyone here is trying to understand." The honesty surprised her. Kings in stories always seem to have answers. Yet Adrian looked just as puzzled as the others. The realization made him seem unexpectedly human. A breeze moved through the clearing. The fountain water sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Emily lowered her gaze. "I am sorry if I caused trouble." The statement escaped before she could stop it. Years of apologizing for existing had become second nature. Adrian's expression changed immediately. "You have nothing to apologize for." The words were simple. Calm. Yet they struck her harder than any grand speech ever could. Emily looked up slowly. Nobody had said something like that to her in a very long time. Around them, the others remained silent. Adrian's attention never left her face. "You were not looking for this place," he continued. "You did not ask for any of this. Whatever happened here is not your fault." For reasons she could not explain, her eyes suddenly stung. She looked away before anyone noticed. The Alpha King turned toward the strangers. "Return to the capital. I will handle the rest." None of them argued. Even Victor obeyed without question. Within minutes, they disappeared into the forest, leaving only Emily, Adrian, and the pup beside the ancient fountain. The clearing felt strangely peaceful again. Emily glanced toward the path leading back through the woods. Then toward Adrian. One question lingered above all the others. "Why?" she asked quietly. Adrian studied her for a moment. "Why what?" Emily swallowed. "Why would the most powerful man in the kingdom spend his time helping someone like me?" The forest fell silent. The Alpha King looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because everyone else looked away."